Judge Patricia Williams pushed through the heavy glass doors of the King County Superior Court building in Seattle, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor with the rhythm of someone who had walked these halls for over 3 decades. The morning fog hung low over Elliott Bay, casting an eerie gray blanket across the city that seemed to seep through the courthouse windows. She clutched her steaming coffee cup like a lifeline, already mentally preparing for what her assistant had warned would be one of those days. The elevator hummed quietly as it carried her to the 3rd floor, but Patricia's mind was elsewhere, reviewing the stack of case files that awaited her attention. Divorce proceedings, custody battles, property disputes, the usual Tuesday morning lineup that had become as predictable as the Seattle rain. At 62, she had presided over thousands of cases, witnessed countless family dramas unfold in her courtroom, and thought she had seen every possible variation of human conflict and resolution. But as the elevator doors opened with a soft ding, her assistant Margaret rushed toward her with an expression that immediately set Patricia's nerves on edge. Margaret had worked at the courthouse for 15 years and rarely displayed anything more dramatic than mild concern, even during the most chaotic proceedings. "Judge Williams," Margaret whispered urgently, falling into step beside her as they walked toward chambers. "We have an unusual situation in courtroom 3. The Rodriguez custody case. There's a service dog involved, and the child refuses to proceed without the animal present." Patricia paused mid-stride, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "A service dog? In a custody hearing? What kind of service animal are we talking about, Margaret?" "A golden retriever, Your Honor. The little girl, Emma Rodriguez, she's only 8 years old. She has severe anxiety disorder, and the dog is trained to assist her." Both attorneys have agreed to allow the animal in the courtroom, but ... double quotes, Margaret hesitated, lowering her voice even further. "Judge, there's something about this case that feels different. The child seems absolutely terrified, and she won't speak above a whisper. The court reporter is already expressing concerns about being able to transcribe her testimony." As they reached her chambers, Patricia set down her coffee and immediately pulled the Rodriguez file from her desk. The photographs paper-clipped to the inside cover showed a family that had once been happy, Miguel and Sarah Rodriguez on their wedding day, then with baby Emma, smiling and embracing in what appeared to be better times. But the case notes painted a darker picture that had emerged over the past 18 months of bitter divorce proceedings. The custody battle had been particularly nasty, with allegations flying from both sides. Miguel Rodriguez, a successful construction contractor, claimed his ex-wife Sarah was mentally unstable and unfit to care for their daughter. Sarah counter-alleged that Miguel had become increasingly controlling and verbally abusive during their marriage, creating an environment that had traumatized young Emma to the point where she required therapy and eventually a service animal. Patricia flipped through the medical documentation that had been submitted as evidence. Emma's pediatric psychiatrist, Dr. Lisa Chun, had provided extensive reports detailing the child's diagnosis of severe anxiety disorder, panic attacks, and what the doctor carefully termed situational trauma responses. The little girl had been in therapy for over a year, and the recommendation for a psychiatric service dog had come after traditional therapy methods had shown limited progress. "The dog's name is Max," Margaret continued, reading from her notes. "He's a 2-year-old golden retriever trained by Canine Companions for Independence. According to the documentation, he's specifically trained to interrupt anxiety attacks, provide deep pressure therapy, and..." She paused, squinting at her handwriting. "Perform something called room searches to help Emma feel safe in new environments." Patricia had encountered service animals in her courtroom before, primarily guide dogs for visually impaired attorneys or witnesses. But a psychiatric service dog for an 8-year-old child was entirely new territory. She made a mental note to research the legal precedents for allowing such accommodations during testimony, though she suspected there weren't many cases to reference. "What's the current custody arrangement?" Patricia asked, though she already knew the answer from her preliminary review of the file. "Joint custody, but it's been problematic. There have been multiple contempt motions filed by both sides. Emma's mother claims the child comes home from visits with her father increasingly withdrawn and anxious. The father's attorney argues that the mother is coaching the child and using her emotional state as a weapon in the custody battle." Patricia nodded grimly. She had seen this pattern too many times. Children caught in the crossfire of their parents' bitter conflicts, their emotional well-being sacrificed on the altar of adult vengeance and wounded pride. But something about Emma's case felt different, more urgent somehow. "Where are they now?" she asked, glancing at her watch. The hearing was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. "The child and her mother are in conference room B with the service. Dr. Chun is also present to provide support. The father and his attorney are in conference room A. Judge, I have to tell you, when I went to check on the little girl earlier, she was sitting on the floor with that dog, and she looked absolutely terrified. She kept looking toward the door, as if she expected something terrible to walk through it." Patricia felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the Seattle morning fog. In 30 years of family law, she had developed an instinct for sensing when a case involved more than just typical divorce drama. Something about 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez and her golden retriever companion was setting off every alarm bell. She had developed over 3 decades of protecting children caught in custody disputes. "Make sure the court reporter has fresh batteries in her equipment," Patricia instructed, gathering her robes. "And ask the bailiff to be especially attentive during this hearing. I have a feeling we're going to need all our resources today." As Margaret hurried away to make the arrangements, Patricia stood alone in her chambers, staring out the window at the fog-shrouded city below. Somewhere in this building, a little girl was preparing to tell her story to a room full of adults. Who would decide her fate? And for reasons she couldn't yet articulate, Judge Patricia Williams suspected that this Tuesday morning was about to become one of the most important and shocking days of her entire career. The courtroom felt different the moment Judge Patricia Williams entered through her private door behind the bench. The usual hum of legal proceedings, shuffling papers, whispered conversations between attorneys, the familiar creak of wooden chairs, all seemed muted, as if the very air itself was holding its breath. Her eyes immediately found the source of this unusual atmosphere. A small figure hunched in the witness area, barely visible except for the flash of golden fur beside her chair. Emma Rodriguez looked even smaller than her 8 years suggested, dressed in a navy blue dress that her mother had clearly chosen to make her appear mature and credible. But the effect was heartbreaking rather than convincing. She resembled a child playing dress-up in clothes meant for someone much older. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail that couldn't quite conceal the way she kept glancing nervously around the room, her dark eyes wide with barely contained panic. Beside her, Max the golden retriever lay with practiced stillness, his intelligent amber eyes alert and watchful. The dog's positioning was deliberate, close enough to provide comfort, but not so close as to obstruct the court's view of Emma. Even from the bench, Patricia could see the subtle tension in the animal's posture, the way his ears swiveled slightly at every sound, every movement in the courtroom. This was clearly a working dog, trained and ready to respond to his young handler's needs. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and the courtroom came to its feet with the usual rustle of fabric and creaking of joints. Patricia noticed that Emma struggled to stand, her small hand gripping the arm of her chair for support, while her other hand maintained contact with Max's back. The connection between child and dog was immediately apparent. They moved as one unit, each aware of the other's position and emotional state. "Be seated," Patricia said, settling into her own chair and taking a moment to scan the room. Miguel. Rodriguez sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, James Morrison, a sharp-dressed man in his 50s who specialized in high-conflict custody cases. Miguel appeared confident, almost relaxed, wearing an expensive suit and sporting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked like any other concerned father fighting for time with his child, but something about his demeanor set Patricia's instincts on edge. On the opposite side of the courtroom, Sarah Rodriguez sat with her attorney, Linda Chun, no relation to Emma's therapist despite the shared surname. Sarah looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and the drawn expression of someone who hadn't slept properly in months. She kept stealing glances at her daughter, her face a mask of worry and barely suppressed anxiety. Dr. Lisa Chun, Emma's therapist, sat in the gallery directly behind Sarah, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough away to avoid accusations of coaching. Patricia had reviewed Dr. Chun's credentials, thoroughly 15 years of experience in pediatric trauma, specialized training in anxiety disorders, and an impeccable reputation among her peers. "We're here today for the custody modification hearing in the matter of Rodriguez versus Rodriguez," Patricia began, her voice carrying the formal weight of legal proceedings. "I want to remind everyone present that we are dealing with the welfare of a minor child, and I expect all parties to conduct themselves accordingly." She turned her attention to Emma, softening her voice considerably. "Good morning, Emma. I know this might feel scary, but I want you to know that you're safe here. Can you tell me your full name for the record?" Emma's lips moved, but no sound emerged. She tried again, her voice so quiet that even the court reporter, who had positioned herself as close as possible, strained to hear. "Emma ... Emma Maria Rodriguez," she whispered, the words barely more than a breath. Patricia leaned forward, her maternal instincts overriding judicial protocol. "That's a beautiful name, Emma. Can you speak a little louder so everyone can hear?" "You? Take your time. There's no rush." But instead of speaking louder, Emma seemed to shrink further into herself. Her right hand, which had been resting on Max's back, began to move in what appeared to be random nervous gestures. 3 quick taps with her fingers, followed by a small circular motion with her palm. To most observers, it looked like typical anxiety-induced fidgeting from a nervous child. Max's response, however, was anything but typical. The golden retriever's head lifted slightly, his ears pricking forward with sudden attention. His tail, which had been lying still against the floor, twitched once, a subtle movement that only someone watching carefully would have noticed. "Emma," Patricia continued gently, "I'd like to ask you some questions about where you like to spend your time, about your home. Can you tell me about your living situation?" Miguel Rodriguez leaned forward slightly in his chair, his lawyer placing a restraining hand on his arm. His confident smile had shifted into something more intense, more focused. Patricia caught the movement in her peripheral vision and filed it away as potentially significant. Emma's voice came again, barely audible even in the hushed courtroom. I live with Mama most of the time, and sometimes I visit Daddy." "And how do you feel about those visits?" Patricia asked, watching carefully for Emma's reaction. The little girl's hand moved again, the same pattern of taps and circular motions, but more urgent this time. Max shifted position almost imperceptibly, angling his body slightly more toward Emma while maintaining his trained stillness. The movement was so subtle that most people in the courtroom missed it entirely, but Patricia's trained eye caught the change. Emma started, then stopped, her eyes darting toward her father's table before quickly looking away. "I try to be good, Daddy says. Daddy says I should be good and not cause trouble." The words hung in the air like smoke, carrying implications that made Patricia's stomach clench. She had heard similar phrases in hundreds of custody cases, but something about the way Emma delivered them, the careful word choice, the fearful glance, the continuing hand movements, suggested layers of meaning that went far beyond normal. Father-daughter interactions. Miguel Rodriguez nodded approvingly at his daughter's words, his smile returning full force. He looked like a man who had coached his daughter well, confident that she would say exactly what he wanted her to say. But Patricia noticed something else. The way Max had begun to position himself more protectively, the increasing urgency of Emma's hand signals, and most telling of all, the way the little girl's entire body seemed to tense whenever she looked in her father's direction. The court reporter looked up with concern, her expression clearly communicating her difficulty in accurately transcribing Emma's whispered testimony. Patricia made a decision that would prove to be crucial. Instead of pressuring the child to speak louder, she would work within Emma's comfort zone and pay closer attention to what wasn't being said aloud. "Emma," she said softly, "I want you to know that in this courtroom, you can say anything you need to say. No one here will be upset with you for telling the truth. Do you understand that?" Emma nodded, but her hand movements became even more frantic, and Max's protective positioning became more pronounced. Whatever the little girl was trying to communicate through her whispered words and nervous gestures, her specially trained companion was receiving the message loud and clear. Patricia Williams had no idea that she was witnessing the beginning of the most extraordinary testimony of her career, a desperate child's secret, language of survival that would soon expose truths too dangerous for words. The transformation in Max began so gradually that at first only Emma seemed to notice. What had started as subtle ear movements and slight shifts in position was evolving into something far more deliberate and protective. Judge Patricia Williams continued her gentle questioning, unaware that she was witnessing the activation of 18 months of intensive training designed to protect a vulnerable child from psychological harm. "Emma, when you visit your father's house, what kinds of activities do you do together?" Patricia asked, her voice maintaining the careful, non-threatening tone she had perfected over decades of questioning traumatized children. Emma's response came in the same barely audible whisper that had characterized all her answers. We watch TV sometimes. And Daddy shows me his work pictures. He builds houses." But as she spoke, Emma's right hand continued its strange pattern of movements against Max's fur. 3 quick taps, a circular motion, then a longer stroke that seemed almost like she was writing invisible letters. To the untrained eye, it appeared to be nothing more than a nervous child seeking comfort from her service animal. Max, however, was reading every signal with the precision of a trained professional. The golden retriever's 75-pound frame began to shift with purpose, his movements fluid but unmistakably deliberate. First, he lifted his head higher, his intelligent, amber eyes scanning the courtroom with new intensity. Then, almost imperceptibly, he began to reposition his body. Sarah Rodriguez, sitting at the plaintiff's table, noticed the change immediately. She had lived with Max and Emma for 8 months now, and had become intimately familiar with the dogs' various behaviors and responses. This wasn't Max's typical courthouse nervousness or his standard comfort-providing posture. This was something else entirely, something that made Sarah's heart rate accelerate with maternal alarm. Dr. Lisa Chun, observing from the gallery, felt her professional instincts kick into high alert. She had spent countless hours working with Emma and Max during their training sessions, teaching the child how to communicate her distress levels through specific signals that Max would recognize and respond to accordingly. What she was witnessing now was the implementation of that training in real time, and it terrified her. The bailiff, Officer Martinez, a 20-year veteran of courthouse security, noticed Max's behavioral shift from his position near the judges' bench. In his experience, service animals in courtrooms typically remain calm and unobtrusive throughout proceedings. This golden retriever's increasing alertness and protective positioning was unlike anything he had encountered in his career. Miguel Rodriguez, however, seemed oblivious to the drama unfolding mere feet away from him. He maintained his confident smile, occasionally nodding approvingly at his daughter's responses, secure in his belief that his coaching had been effective. His attorney, James Morrison, was busy taking notes and appeared equally unaware of the subtle crisis developing in the witness area. "That sounds nice, Emma," Patricia continued, though she was beginning to feel increasingly uneasy about the entire situation. "Can you tell me about bedtime at your father's house? Do you have your own room there?" Emma's response triggered the most dramatic change yet. Her hand movements became more urgent, almost frantic, and Max responded with swift decisiveness. The golden retriever rose smoothly to his feet, his full size now apparent as he positioned himself more directly between Emma and her father's side of the courtroom. The movement was so fluid and purposeful that it commanded attention from everyone present. Max didn't simply stand up. He moved with the calculated precision of a trained protector assuming a defensive position. His body formed a living barrier, his stance wide and stable, his head held high with alert awareness. "Oh my," Patricia murmured, pausing in her questioning as she observed Max's behavior. A dog's positioning was unmistakable. He was protecting Emma from perceived threat, and that threat appeared to be coming from the direction of her father. Dr. Chun could no longer remain silent. The signals Emma was sending were becoming increasingly distressed, and Max's responses were escalating. Accordingly, she recognized the specific combination of hand movements Emma was using signals they had practiced extensively during therapy sessions, signals that meant unsafe, scared, and most alarmingly, "Help me." "Your Honor," Dr. Chun said, half rising from her seat in the gallery, "might I request a brief sidebar?" Patricia looked up, grateful for the interruption. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted dramatically, and she was beginning to suspect that Emma's whispered testimony was only the surface of a much deeper and more troubling situation. "Mr. Morrison, Miss Chun, please approach the bench," Patricia said, using the attorneys' names to maintain professional protocol while her mind raced to process what she was observing. As the attorneys approached, Max made another adjustment to his position, moving even closer to Emma while maintaining his protective stance. The little girl's hand continued its urgent signaling, her movements becoming more desperate with each passing moment. Miguel Rodriguez finally seemed to notice the commotion. His confident expression flickered with annoyance as he watched his daughter's service dog positioning himself like a barrier between them. For just a moment, his mask slipped, revealing something darker underneath, irritation that his carefully orchestrated plan was being disrupted by an animal he hadn't accounted for. "What seems to be the issue?" he called out, his voice carrying a tone of authority that seemed inappropriate given the circumstances. The sound of his raised voice caused an immediate response from both Emma and Max. The child's hand signals became even more frantic, and the dog's protective stance intensified noticeably. Patricia held up her hand to silence Miguel while the attorneys reached the bench. In her peripheral vision, she could see Emma hunched over in her chair, her small body trembling as she continued her desperate communication with Max. The golden retriever remained steady and alert, a living shield powered by months of training and an unbreakable bond with the child he was sworn to protect. "Dr. Chun," Patricia said quietly to the therapist who had requested the sidebar, "I need you to explain to me exactly what I'm witnessing here. This dog's behavior is far from typical, and Emma appears to be in significant distress." Dr. Chun took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would either vindicate months of careful preparation or potentially expose Emma to even greater danger. The secret language that she and Emma had developed was about to be revealed in the most public way possible, and the consequences would reshape not only this custody case, but potentially the entire legal system's approach to protecting traumatized children. The courtroom waited in tense silence as three professionals huddled at the bench, while a little girl continued her desperate conversation with the only being in the room who truly understood the depth of her fear and the reality of her danger. Dr. Lisa Chun's hands trembled as she approached the bench, her professional composure barely masking the urgency that threatened to spill over into panic. Behind her, she could hear Emma's increasingly frantic whispers and the subtle sounds of Max adjusting his protective stance. 23 years of clinical practice had taught her to remain calm in crisis situations, but nothing had prepared her for watching her young patient's carefully constructed safety system activate in real time in a court of law. "Your Honor," Dr. Chun began, her voice low but clear, "what you're witnessing is a trained response system that Emma and Max developed during our therapy sessions. Those hand movements aren't random nervous gestures. They're specific distress signals that indicate Emma feels she's in immediate psychological danger." Judge Patricia Williams felt her blood pressure spike as the implications hit her. "Are you telling me that this child has been trying to communicate distress this entire time?" "Yes, Your Honor. Emma suffers from severe anxiety and trauma responses stemming from psychological abuse. During our sessions, it became clear that she was too frightened to verbalize her fears directly, particularly when the source of those fears was present. We developed a communication system using Max as an intermediary, a way for Emma to signal for help when words became too dangerous." James Morrison, Miguel's attorney, shifted uncomfortably. His confidence was beginning to crack as he realized the implications of what Dr. Chun was revealing. "Your Honor, this sounds like an elaborate coaching scheme designed to prejudice the court against my client." "There's no scientific basis for—" "Mr. Morrison," Patricia interrupted sharply, "I suggest you let Dr. Chun finish explaining before you make accusations about the credibility of expert testimony." Dr. Chun nodded gratefully and continued, pulling a small notebook from her jacket pocket. "I have 18 months of documented sessions detailing Emma's progress and the development of this communication system. The specific signals she's using right now indicate escalating levels of fear and a desperate need for protection." Patricia looked over at Emma, who was now hunched so low in her chair that she was almost hidden behind Max's golden form. The child's hand movements had become so rapid they were barely distinguishable, and Max had positioned himself in what could only be described as a full protective stance. "What exactly do these signals mean?" Patricia asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer would fundamentally change everything about this case. "The 3 quick taps mean unsafe," Dr. Chun explained, consulting her notes. "The circular motion translates to scared, and the longer stroking gesture means help me. When Emma uses these signals in sequence repeatedly, as she's doing now, it indicates that she perceives an immediate threat to her emotional or psychological safety." The courtroom had fallen into an eerie silence. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her face pale as she absorbed the shocking revelation that the child's testimony had been accompanied by a parallel conversation that none of them had understood. Sarah Rodriguez had tears streaming down her face as the pieces of her daughter's behavior over the past year suddenly fell into place. The withdrawn silences after visits with Miguel, the way Emma would seek out Max immediately upon returning home, and nightmares that had increased in frequency and intensity. It all made horrifying sense now. "Dr. Chun," Patricia said carefully, "are you telling this court that Emma has been signaling distress about her father this entire time?" "Your Honor, I can only interpret the signals Emma is sending. But based on 18 months of working with her, and knowing that these particular combinations only emerge when she feels threatened by someone she perceives as having power over her. Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Miguel Rodriguez could no longer maintain his facade of calm concern. From his seat at the defendant's table, he called out, "This is ridiculous. My daughter is fine when she's with me. This woman has been filling her head with nonsense about Mr. Rodriguez." Patricia's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "You will remain silent unless I specifically address you, or I will have you removed from this courtroom." The sharp exchange caused an immediate and dramatic response from both Emma and Max. The little girl's signaling became so frantic it looked like she was having some kind of seizure, while Max moved even closer to her, his body now forming a complete barrier between Emma and her father. The golden retriever's ears were flattened against his head, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, a low, barely audible whine escaped his throat. Dr. Chun recognized the escalation immediately. "Your Honor, Emma's signals are indicating extreme distress." Max's whining is a trained response that alerts adults when Emma's anxiety levels have reached critical levels. "We need to address this situation immediately." Patricia Williams realized she was at a crossroads that would define not only this case, but potentially her entire career. The evidence before her was unlike anything she had encountered. A child too terrified to speak openly about abuse, a service dog trained to translate her fears, and a communication system born out of desperation and survival instinct. "Dr. Chun, I need you to help me understand something," Patricia said, her voice heavy with the weight of what she was beginning to comprehend. "If Emma has been this frightened during her testimony, what does that suggest about her experiences during court-ordered visitations with her father? Your Honor, based on my professional assessment and Emma's current signaling patterns, I believe she has been living in a state of chronic fear and hypervigilance. The fact that she's exhibiting these extreme distress responses in her father's presence in what should be a safe and controlled environment suggests that her fears are well-founded and ongoing." The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Patricia looked at Emma, still desperately signaling to her canine protector, then at Miguel, whose mask of fatherly concern had slipped to reveal something much darker underneath. The comfortable assumptions about family dynamics and custody arrangements that had guided her career were crumbling before her eyes. "Mr. Morrison, Miss Chun," Patricia addressed both attorneys, "I'm calling a recess. I need time to review the documentation Dr. Chun has referenced, and I need to determine how to proceed with a case where the primary witness has been communicating distress through channels we didn't even know existed." As the judge announced the recess, Emma's frantic signaling finally began to slow, as if the acknowledgement of her secret language had provided the first real hope she had felt in months. Max remained vigilant and protective, but his body language suggested that for the first time since entering the courtroom, he sensed that help might finally be coming for the little girl he had sworn to protect. The secret was out, and there would be no going back. The 30-minute recess felt like an eternity for everyone involved. Judge Patricia Williams sequestered herself in her chambers with Dr. Chun's extensive documentation, each page revealing layers of psychological manipulation and trauma that made her stomach churn. Meanwhile, in the courthouse hallway, Sarah Rodriguez knelt beside her daughter and Max, finally understanding the silent battle Emma had been fighting for over a year. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Patricia had made a decision that would either revolutionize child testimony protocols or potentially create grounds for appeal that could overturn any ruling she made. But looking at Emma's small, trembling form still desperately signaling to Max, she knew she had no choice but to pursue the truth through whatever means necessary. "We're back on the record in the matter of Rodriguez versus Rodriguez," Patricia announced, her voice carrying a gravity that hadn't been present before the recess. Dr. Chun, I've reviewed your documentation, and I'm prepared to allow an experimental approach to this testimony. I'm going to ask Emma questions that can be answered with simple yes or no responses, and I want you to interpret her communications. With Max for the court record, James Morrison shot to his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is highly irregular and prejudicial to my client. There's no legal precedent for allowing a dog to essentially testify on behalf of a child. This entire procedure should be, Mr. Morrison. Patricia's voice cut through his objection like steel. I've spent the recess researching accommodations for children with disabilities under both state and federal law. This court has broad discretion in ensuring that a minor child can communicate effectively about matters affecting her welfare. Your objection is noted and overruled. Patricia turned her attention to Emma, who had managed to look up from her protective huddle with Max. The little girl's eyes were red from tears, but there was something different in her expression now. A flicker of hope that hadn't been there before. Emma, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer with just yes or no. Okay? If you feel scared or unsafe at any point, you can use your signals with Max, and Dr. Chun will help us understand. Do you think you can do that? Emma nodded, her hand already resting on Max's back in preparation. The golden retriever seemed to sense the importance of the moment, his posture alert, but calmer than it had been during the earlier proceedings. First question, Emma. When you visit your father's house, do you feel safe there? The response was immediate and heartbreaking. Emma's hand began the familiar pattern of distress signals, and Max shifted protectively. No, she whispered, so quietly that the court reporter had to strain to hear. Dr. Chun, please interpret what you're observing. Your Honor, Emma is signaling unsafe and scared repeatedly. Max is responding with protective positioning that indicates he recognizes significant distress. Miguel Rodriguez is confident. Facade finally cracked completely. This is insane, he shouted, causing Emma to shrink back against Max. My daughter is being manipulated by this this circus. There's nothing wrong with our visits. The outburst triggered an explosive response from both Emma and Max. The little girl's signaling became so frantic it looked like panic, while Max immediately positioned himself fully between Emma and her father, a low growl rumbling in his chest, the first sound he had made since entering the courtroom. Mr. Rodriguez, you will control yourself, or you will be removed, Patricia commanded, but the damage was done. Emma was now in full panic mode, her breathing rapid and shallow. Dr. Chun moved quickly toward the witness area. Your Honor, Emma is having an anxiety attack. Her signals are indicating extreme fear, and Max is responding to a perceived immediate threat. Emma, Patricia said gently, ignoring the chaos around her. You're safe. No one can hurt you here. Can you tell me, does your father ever say things that scare you? Through her panic, Emma managed to nod frantically while continuing her desperate signaling. What kind of things does he say? Can you use your words? Emma's voice came out in a rush of terror-induced honesty. He says bad things will happen if I tell secrets. He says Mama will go away forever. He says Max will be taken away if I'm bad. The courtroom erupted. Sarah Rodriguez gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. James Morrison began objecting rapidly, but his words were drowned out by his client's increasingly agitated protests. Emma's lying, Miguel shouted, his mask of civility completely abandoned. She's been coached. This whole thing is a setup. But Emma wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and 18 months of suppressed fear came pouring out. He watches me all the time when I'm there. He listens to my phone calls with Mama. He makes me practice what to say in court. He says judges don't believe little girls who tell lies about their daddies. Max's response to Emma's revelations was immediate and unmistakable. The golden retriever positioned himself in a full alert stance, his body language screaming protection. Mode. Dr. Chun quickly documented Emma's signals, which had shifted from panic to what she recognized as truth-telling, a specific combination they had practiced for situations where Emma felt safe enough to reveal her experiences. "Your Honor," Dr. Chun called out over the courtroom chaos, "Emma's signals have changed. She's now indicating truth and safe to tell. This is the first time in 18 months of therapy that she's felt secure enough to verbalize these experiences." Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order while processing the bombshell revelations. "Mr. Rodriguez, you will sit down and remain silent, or you will be held in contempt." But Miguel was beyond reason now, his carefully constructed facade completely shattered. "She's just a kid. Kids make things up. You can't believe this nonsense over a grown man's word." Emma's response to her father's dismissive words was to signal more frantically than ever, and Max moved even closer, his protective instincts in full activation. The little girl found her voice again, stronger this time. "I'm not making it up. You said those things. You said them lots of times." The moment hung in the air like a revelation, an 8-year-old child supported by her loyal protector, finally finding the courage to speak truth to power. Emma's secret language with Max had given her the strength to break 18 months of enforced silence, and the carefully maintained fiction of Miguel's loving fatherhood was crumbling in real time. Patricia Williams realized she was witnessing something unprecedented, the intersection of innovative therapy, animal-assisted intervention, and a child's desperate fight for her own safety. The secret code of fear that Emma and Max had developed was not just revealing the truth about this custody case. It was revolutionizing how the legal system could protect the most vulnerable witnesses of all. The truth was finally emerging, one desperate signal at a time. The courtroom remained in stunned silence as Dr. Lisa Chun was sworn in as an expert witness. Her hands shook slightly as she placed them on the Bible, the weight of 18 months of documentation and professional responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She had testified in custody cases before, but never under circumstances where a child's survival depended on translating a secret language born from desperation and fear. Judge Patricia Williams studied Dr. Chun's credentials one final time before beginning her questioning. The therapist held a doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Washington, specialized certification in pediatric trauma, and had published extensively on innovative therapeutic interventions for children who had experienced psychological abuse. Her reputation was impeccable, but what she was about to reveal would challenge every conventional understanding of child testimony and therapeutic intervention. "Dr. Chun, please explain to the court your professional relationship with Emma Rodriguez and how you came to develop this communication system with her service dog." Dr. Chun took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "Emma was referred to me in March of 2024 by her pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Williams, after exhibiting severe anxiety symptoms, panic attacks, and what her mother described as selective mutism following visits with her father. Initial sessions revealed a child suffering from complex trauma responses consistent with ongoing psychological abuse. She opened her leather portfolio, revealing months of meticulous documentation. Emma's presenting symptoms included hypervigilance, dissociation, during discussions about her father, and what I came to recognize as learned helplessness. She had been systematically conditioned to believe that speaking truthfully about her experiences would result in catastrophic consequences. Miguel Rodriguez's attorney, James Morrison, scribbled notes furiously, clearly preparing to challenge Dr. Chun's conclusions. Meanwhile, Miguel himself sat rigid in his chair, his face a mask of barely controlled rage, as his carefully constructed narrative was systematically dismantled by professional expertise. During our fourth session, Dr. Chun continued, Emma revealed that her father had told her that bad things happen to little girls who tell lies about their daddies. She described feeling constantly watched and monitored during visits, with her father coaching her on what to say if anyone asked about their time together. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and systematic. Judge Williams leaned forward, her professional composure barely masking her horror. Dr. Chun, can you explain how Emma's condition led to the recommendation for a psychiatric service dog? Traditional talk therapy was proving insufficient, because Emma had been conditioned to believe that verbal disclosure would result in punishment or abandonment. She lived in constant fear that her father would follow through on his threats to have her mother arrested for lying, or to have her removed from her mother's care permanently. We needed an intervention that would allow Emma to communicate distress without the perceived danger of verbal disclosure. Dr. Chun pulled out a thick folder filled with training protocols and behavioral assessments. I worked with canine companions for Independence to develop a specialized training program for Max. The goal was to create a communication system that would allow Emma to signal different levels of distress and specific types of threats without having to verbalize them directly. Can you elaborate on the specific signals and Max's responses? Patricia asked, though she suspected the answer would be even more disturbing than what they had already witnessed. We developed 27 distinct signals, each corresponding to different emotional states and threat levels. The 3 signals Emma used most frequently in today's proceedings were the emergency sequence: unsafe, scared, and help me. Max was trained to respond to these signals with specific protective behaviors designed to alert adults while providing Emma with a sense of security. Dr. Chun's voice grew heavy with professional anguish as she continued, Your Honor, the fact that Emma felt compelled to use the emergency sequence continuously during her father's presence today indicates that she perceives him as an active threat to her psychological safety. In 18 months of therapy, these particular signals have only emerged during discussions of traumatic events or when Emma felt genuinely endangered. The implications of Dr. Chun's testimony were staggering. Sarah Rodriguez wept openly as she realized the depth of trauma her daughter had been experiencing in silence. Even hardened court personnel looked shaken by the revelation that an 8-year-old had required such elaborate protective measures just to survive family visits. Dr. Chun, Judge Williams continued, in your professional opinion, what does Emma's signaling behavior during today's proceedings suggest about her experiences during court-ordered visitations with her father? Based on the intensity and frequency of Emma's distress signals, combined with Max's protective responses, I believe Emma has been living in a state of chronic hypervigilance and fear. A specific combination of signals she used today suggests ongoing psychological threats and systematic intimidation designed to control her testimony and behavior. James Morrison finally rose to cross-examine, his confidence visibly shaken. Dr. Chun, isn't it possible that this elaborate communication system is simply a sophisticated form of coaching designed to prejudice this court against my client? How can you possibly claim scientific validity for interpreting hand gestures and dog behavior? Dr. Chun's response was swift and professional. Mr. Morrison, service dogs are trained using scientifically validated behavioral conditioning methods. Max's responses are not subjective interpretations. They are trained behaviors triggered by specific stimuli. The signals Emma uses were developed through months of therapeutic work and are documented extensively in my clinical notes. She pulled out video recordings from therapy sessions. I have documented evidence of Emma's signal development, Max's training progression, and most importantly, the correlation between Emma's signals and her subsequent verbal disclosures about traumatic experiences. This isn't coaching. It's a legitimate therapeutic intervention designed to help a traumatized child communicate when words become too dangerous. The weight of professional evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Chun presented session notes, training videos, behavioral assessments, and expert consultation records that painted a picture of systematic psychological abuse that had driven a child to develop elaborate survival mechanisms. Furthermore, Dr. Chun continued, Emma's use of these signals in the presence of her father, combined with his aggressive reaction to her testimony, demonstrates the very dynamic I've been treating. A child who has been systematically intimidated into silence, finally finding the courage to seek help through the only safe communication method available to her. As Dr. Chun concluded her testimony, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. The evidence was no longer circumstantial or interpretive. It was documented, professional, and devastating. Emma's secret language with Max wasn't just a heartwarming story of a girl and her dog. It was a meticulously crafted survival system born from months of psychological terrorism, inflicted by the person who should have protected her most. Judge Williams realized that this case would forever change how courts approach child testimony and protective interventions. The intersection of innovative therapy, animal-assisted intervention, and legal advocacy had created something unprecedented. Irrefutable evidence of a child's truth, delivered through the most unlikely of interpreters. The transformation of Miguel Rodriguez, from concerned father to exposed predator, began the moment Judge Patricia Williams called him to testify on his own behalf. His attorney, James Morrison, had clearly advised against it, but Miguel's narcissistic confidence and desperate need to control the narrative overrode legal wisdom. As he approached the witness stand, his movements carried the swagger of a man, convinced he could charm his way out of any situation. Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Williams began, her voice carrying none of the gentle tone she had used with Emma. You've heard your daughter's testimony and Dr. Chun's expert analysis. I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to these allegations. Miguel settled into the witness chair with practiced ease, adjusting his expensive tie and flashing the same confident smile that had served him well in business dealings. Your Honor, I love my daughter more than anything in this world. What you've witnessed today is the result of months of manipulation and coaching by my ex-wife and her therapist. Emma is a bright child, but she's been turned against me by people who want to destroy our relationship. As Miguel spoke, Emma's hand movements against Max's fur became more agitated. The golden retriever's response was immediate and unmistakable. His ears flattened against his head, and he positioned himself even more protectively around the little girl. Dr. Chun, still seated in the witness area, watched the interaction with growing alarm. Mr. Rodriguez, Patricia continued, your daughter has testified that you threatened her with consequences if she spoke truthfully about your visits. How do you respond to that allegation? Miguel's laugh was harsh and dismissive. Children have active imaginations, Your Honor. Emma has always been a dramatic child, prone to storytelling. I've never threatened her. I've simply tried to teach her the importance of honesty and loyalty to family. The word loyalty triggered an immediate response from Emma. Her signaling became frantic, and Max's protective stance intensified. Dramatically, the dog's behavior was so pronounced that even the court reporter looked up from her machine, sensing the escalating tension. Mr. Rodriguez, Patricia pressed, can you explain to this court why your daughter exhibits such extreme distress in your presence? Why would a child develop elaborate distress signals when around her father if there was no basis for fear? For the first time, Miguel's composure cracked slightly. I don't know what games she's been taught to play with that dog, but I can tell you that Emma is perfectly happy when she's with me. We have wonderful visits together. She tells me all the time how much she loves me and wants to live with me full time. The lie was so blatant, so contradictory to everything the court had witnessed, that Patricia felt her judicial patience wearing thin. "Mr. Rodriguez, if your visits are so wonderful, why does your daughter require a psychiatric service dog trained specifically to help her cope with anxiety and trauma?" Miguel's mask began to slip more visibly. "That's another one of her mother's manipulations. Sarah has been trying to turn Emma into some kind of victim since our divorce began. The whole trauma narrative is designed to make me look bad and win her full custody." Dr. Chun could no longer remain silent. "Your Honor, Emma's signals are indicating extreme distress. Mr. Rodriguez's dismissive language and tone are triggering the exact responses we've documented in therapy sessions when she discusses her father's behavior." Miguel whirled around in the witness chair, his carefully maintained facade cracking completely. "You've poisoned my daughter's mind. You've turned her against me with your psychological mumbo-jumbo and that ridiculous dog. Emma was fine before you got your claws into her." The outburst was exactly what Patricia had been waiting for. A glimpse of the real Miguel Rodriguez, the man behind the charming facade. Emma's response was immediate and heartbreaking. She curled into a protective ball against Max, her signaling becoming so frantic it looked like a seizure. "Mr. Rodriguez," Patricia said sharply, "you will control your tone and language in my courtroom." But Miguel was beyond control now. 18 months of careful manipulation and image management dissolving in real time. "This whole thing is a circus. My daughter has been brainwashed by these people who want to destroy me. Emma knows she belongs with me, not with her unstable mother." James Morrison was frantically trying to signal his client to stop talking, but Miguel was in full narcissistic rage mode. The very control and intimidation tactics that had worked so effectively on an 8-year-old were now being displayed for the entire court to witness. "Mr. Rodriguez," Patricia continued relentlessly, "your daughter testified that you told her bad things happen to little girls who tell lies about their daddies. Did you make that statement?" "I taught her about the consequences of dishonesty." Miguel shot back, his voice rising dangerously. "Children need to understand that actions have consequences. I was trying to protect her from the damage her mother's lies could cause." Ugh. Admission hung in the air like a confession. Patricia leaned forward, sensing she was close to a complete breakdown. "And what exactly did you mean by consequences, Mr. Rodriguez?" Miguel's response revealed the full scope of his psychological manipulation. "I told her the truth, that if she repeated the lies her mother taught her, Child Protective Services might take her away from both of us. I told her that judges don't like little girls who make up stories about their fathers. I was trying to protect her from the system." The courtroom erupted. Sarah Rodriguez gasped audibly as she finally heard confirmation of the threats that had terrorized her daughter. Even hardened court officers looked shocked by the blatant admission of psychological intimidation directed at a child. "So you admit to threatening your daughter with removal from her home if she testified truthfully about her experiences with you?" Patricia pressed. "I was protecting her," Miguel screamed, completely abandoning any pretense of self-control. "She's my daughter. I have the right to teach her right from wrong. I have the right to protect her from people who want to poison her mind against me." Emma's response to her father's rage was to signal so desperately that Dr. Chun moved toward her, concerned about the child's psychological state. Max had positioned himself as a complete barrier between Emma and her father, his training telling him that his young charge was in immediate emotional danger. "Your Honor," Dr. Chun called out, "Emma's distress levels are critical. This is exactly the kind of intimidation and psychological abuse we've been documenting in our sessions." Miguel turned his fury on Dr. Chun. "You've destroyed my family. You've turned my own daughter against me. Emma was fine until you filled her head with your victim nonsense." Judge Patricia Williams had seen enough. The man testifying before Her was not a loving father concerned about his daughter's welfare. He was a psychological predator whose carefully constructed facade had finally crumbled under the weight of his own narcissistic rage. Miguel Rodriguez had just confessed to 18 months of systematic psychological abuse while demonstrating the very intimidation tactics that had driven his daughter to develop a secret language of survival. The predator was fully exposed, and there would be no going back to the fiction of loving fatherhood that had protected him for so long. The silence that followed Miguel Rodriguez's breakdown was profound and haunting. Judge Patricia Williams sat at her bench, staring at the man who had just confessed to 18 months of systematic psychological abuse, while his 8-year-old daughter cowered behind her service dog, still frantically signaling her terror. In 30 years of family law, Patricia had never witnessed such a complete unmasking of a predator, or such a clear demonstration of a child's desperate need for protection. Miguel sat slumped in the witness chair, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confident facade completely shattered. The transformation was so complete that he seemed like an entirely different person. The charming, concerned father had been replaced by a bitter, angry man whose true nature was now visible to everyone in the courtroom. His attorney, James Morrison, sat with his head in his hands, knowing that his client had just destroyed any hope of a favorable outcome. "Mr. Rodriguez," Patricia said, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority and moral outrage, "you may step down." As Miguel shuffled back to his seat, Emma's signaling began to slow for the first time all day. Max, ever vigilant, maintained his protective stance, but seemed to sense that the immediate threat was diminishing. Dr. Lisa Chun watched the interaction with professional fascination. Even through her trauma, Emma was beginning to recognize that safety might finally be within reach. Patricia took several moments to compose herself before delivering what she knew would be one of the most important rulings of her career. The precedent she was about to set would ripple through family courts across the nation, potentially changing how the legal system protected vulnerable children forever. In the matter of Rodriguez versus Rodriguez, Patricia began, her voice clear and unwavering. This court has witnessed something unprecedented. We have seen a child so terrorized by psychological abuse that she developed a secret language with her service dog simply to survive. We have heard expert testimony documenting systematic intimidation designed to silence a vulnerable witness. And we have witnessed the perpetrator of this abuse confess to his crimes while demonstrating the very tactics that traumatized his daughter. Sarah Rodriguez held her breath, tears streaming down her face as she waited for the words that would determine her daughter's future. Emma, still huddled with Max, had finally stopped her frantic signaling, as if sensing that the nightmare might finally be ending. "Emma Rodriguez," Patricia continued, looking directly at the little girl, "you have shown extraordinary courage. Today, with the help of your faithful companion Max, you found a way to tell the truth when words became too dangerous. Your bravery has not only protected yourself, but will help protect other children who find themselves in similar situations." Patricia's voice grew stronger as she delivered her ruling. "Therefore, this court awards full legal and physical custody of Emma Rodriguez to her mother, Sarah Rodriguez, effective immediately. Mr. Miguel Rodriguez's parental rights shall be suspended pending completion of a comprehensive psychological evaluation and successful completion of a court-approved parenting program, anger management counseling, and domestic violence intervention therapy." The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs, but Patricia wasn't finished. Furthermore, any future contact between Mr. Rodriguez and his daughter shall be strictly supervised and contingent upon Emma's consent and therapeutic recommendation. This court finds that unsupervised contact would be detrimental to the child's psychological well-being and safety. Miguel Rodriguez looked stunned, as if he couldn't comprehend that his manipulation tactics had finally failed him. "You can't do this," he shouted, causing Emma to press closer to Max. "She's my daughter. I have rights." "Mr. Rodriguez," Patricia said with ice-cold authority, "your rights as a parent are not absolute. They are contingent upon your ability to act in your child's best interests. Today, you have demonstrated beyond any doubt that you pose a psychological threat to your daughter's well-being." The judge turned her attention to the broader implications of the case. "This proceeding has also demonstrated the need for our legal system to evolve in its approach to protecting traumatized children. The innovative therapeutic intervention developed by Dr. Chun and implemented through Emma's service dog Max represents a breakthrough in child advocacy that this court intends to recommend for implementation throughout our judicial system." Patricia looked at Dr. Chun with deep respect. "Dr. Chun, your work with Emma has not only saved one child, but has potentially revolutionized how we approach child testimony in cases involving psychological abuse. This court will be forwarding documentation of these proceedings to the state's Family Court Administration for consideration in developing new protocols for child witness protection." The long-term implications were staggering. Emma's secret language with Max had become the catalyst for a fundamental shift in how courts would handle traumatized children, service animals, and innovative therapeutic interventions. 6 months later, the story of Emma Rodriguez and Max had indeed become legendary. Judge Patricia Williams testified before the Washington State Legislature about the need for expanded accommodations for child witnesses with service animals. The Rodriguez protocols were implemented in family courts across the Pacific Northwest, providing guidelines for recognizing and accommodating innovative communication methods for traumatized children. Emma herself had undergone a remarkable transformation. With Miguel's threats removed and her secret finally revealed, she had gradually found her voice again. The little girl who had once communicated only through desperate hand signals now spoke confidently in therapy sessions and had even addressed a conference of family court judges about the importance of believing children and providing them with safe ways to communicate. Max remained her constant companion, but his role had evolved from desperate protector to supportive friend. The frantic emergency signals had been replaced by gentle communications of everyday needs and emotions. Emma had learned that words could be safe again, but she would always treasure the golden guardian who had helped her survive the darkest period of her young life. Dr. Lisa Chun's innovative approach had attracted national attention, leading to research grants and speaking engagements across the country. The intersection of animal-assisted therapy and legal advocacy had opened entirely new avenues for protecting vulnerable witnesses and ensuring that justice could be served even when traditional methods failed. But perhaps the most important outcome was the simplest. Emma Rodriguez was safe. The 8-year-old who had once lived in constant fear now laughed freely, played without looking over her shoulder, and slept through the night without nightmares. She had learned that speaking truth, even when it's dangerous, could lead to protection and justice. And beside her through it all was Max, the golden retriever who had helped translate a child's silent screams into a language the adult world could finally understand and act upon. Their bond had not only saved Emma, but had fundamentally changed how society protects its most vulnerable members. The secret language had become a beacon of hope for children everywhere,